The makeup artist layered the concealer thick, completely erasing the faint, yellowing bruise on her jaw. Paige stared at her reflection. She looked like a porcelain doll, fragile, empty, ready to be purchased. The white silk of her dress felt like a body bag, and the cathedral bells tolling outside sounded like a death knell. In 10 minutes she would walk down the aisle and marry the man who nearly killed her 2 years ago. There was no way out. The bridal suite smelled of heavy hairspray, expensive champagne, and cold sweat. Paige sat rigid in the velvet chair. The corset of her Vera Wang gown bit into her ribs, right over the spot that still ached when it rained a lingering souvenir from her last night with Colin. 2 years. 2 years of running, of building a quiet, anonymous life in a cramped walk-up, on the other side of the country, pouring coffee and pretending she wasn't looking over her shoulder. It had taken him 18 months to find her. It had taken him another 6 to orchestrate her ruin. The door to the suite clicked open. The makeup artist, a bubbly girl who hadn't stopped talking about how lucky Paige was, scurried out, leaving Paige alone with her father. Arthur walked in heavily. He smelled of scotch and desperation. His tuxedo was tailored flawlessly, but it hung on a frame that had rapidly hollowed out over the last year. He didn't look at her in the mirror. He couldn't. "The guests are seated," Arthur said. His voice was a dry rasp. "Did you get the wire transfer?" Paige asked. Her voice didn't shake. She had cried all her tears 3 weeks ago when Colin's black town car had rolled up to her apartment, followed shortly by a phone call from her weeping father. "Colin's people confirmed it," Arthur mumbled, finally lifting his eyes to meet hers in the glass. "The debt is cleared. The house is safe. The firm, we survive." "You survive?" Paige thought. "I am the currency." Arthur had played at the high roller tables of commercial real estate and lost catastrophically. He was $12 million in the hole to people who didn't send strongly worded letters. They sent men with tire irons. Colin had bought the debt. The terms were simple. Arthur got his life back. Colin got Paige. "I'm sorry, Paigey," Arthur whispered, his eyes shining with a pathetic, watery guilt. "I didn't know what else to do. They were going to kill me. And Colin, he says he's changed. He says he went to therapy." Paige let out a short, hollow laugh. "Therapy. Right. I'll make sure to ask him about his breakthroughs when he's pinning me by my throat." Arthur flinched. Good. She wanted him to carry that. If she was going to march to her own execution, the least her father could do was feel the weight of the rope. "It's time," she said, standing up. The dress cascaded around her, a waterfall of white lies. The walk to the cathedral doors was a blur. The heavy oak swung open, and the opening chords of the bridal chorus echoed through the cavernous space. 300 heads turned. 300 members of high society wearing diamonds and designer suits, smiling at a transaction they all recognized, but politely ignored. The aisle stretched out like a runway, and at the end of it stood Colin. He was strikingly handsome. That was the trap of him. Golden hair, sharp jawline, teeth perfectly straight. He wore a Tom Ford tuxedo that fit his athletic frame to a fraction of an inch. To the untrained eye, he looked like a prince waiting for his bride. Paige knew better. She saw the microscopic tightening of his jaw. She saw the dead flat look in his pale blue eyes. It was the look of a hunter watching an animal bleed out in a trap. He wasn't looking at a woman he loved. He was looking at a possession he had successfully reclaimed. Arthur's grip on her arm was a vice. He was trembling. Paige wasn't. Her terror had calcified into a heavy, freezing stone in her gut. She put one foot in front of the other. The scent of white lilies banked along the pews was suffocating. They smelled like a funeral. Just endure, she told herself. Survive the night. Find a way out tomorrow. Or next year. They reached the altar. Arthur placed her hand in Colin's. Colin's fingers closed around hers. His grip was entirely too tight. The metal of his signet ring dug into her knuckles. "You look beautiful." He murmured, his breath warm against her ear as he leaned in for a ceremonial kiss on the cheek. "And you didn't even try to run. I'm proud of you, Paige." She didn't answer. She couldn't breathe. The priest stepped forward, adjusting his robes. He cleared his throat, his voice projecting into the high, vaulted ceilings. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God and the presence of these witnesses to join together this man and this woman." The words washed over her like dirty water. Paige stared at the intricate gold cross behind the altar, dissociating. She imagined floating up to the vaulted ceiling, looking down at the tiny, pathetic figures playing out a tragedy. If anyone can show just cause why they may not lawfully be joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The priest paused. It was a formality, a theatrical beat in the script. Nobody ever spoke. A heavy, resounding thud echoed through the cathedral. It wasn't a voice. It was the sound of the massive iron-wrought front doors hitting the stone walls as they were violently shoved open. The silence that followed was absolute. The priest froze his mouth half open. 300 guests turned in unison. Colin's grip on Paige's hand tightened to the point of pain. She turned her head. A man was standing in the doorway. He didn't belong in this world of polite, sanitized wealth. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal suit that was undeniably expensive, but lacked the polished, delicate tailoring of the men in the pews. He moved with the lazy, terrifying grace of an apex predator that had just wandered into a petting zoo. Behind him, 4 men filed into the cathedral. They didn't wear tuxedos. They wore dark suits and flat, dead expressions. 2 of them calmly locked the heavy oak doors behind them. The distinct metallic clack of the deadbolts engaging sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. The man in the charcoal suit began to walk down the aisle. He didn't rush. His leather shoes struck the marble floor in a slow, rhythmic tempo. Tap, tap, tap. Paige couldn't take her eyes off his face. He had dark, sweeping hair, olive skin, and a jawline that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite and broken in a few fights since. But it was his eyes that stopped the breath in her throat. They were dark, bottomless, and completely void of warmth. They were the eyes of a man who dealt in violence every single day of his life. The guests shrank back into their pews as he passed. The air in the cathedral seemed to drop 10 degrees. Colin dropped Paige's hand. He took a half step in front of her, his golden boy facade slipping to reveal the arrogant anger underneath. "What the hell is this?" Colin barked. His voice cracked just slightly, betraying the sudden spike of adrenaline. "Who let you in here? This is a private ceremony." The man didn't look at Colin. He stopped at the base of the altar steps, his hands resting casually in his pockets. He looked at Arthur, who was standing a few feet away, pale and visibly shaking. Then the man looked at Paige. His gaze dragged over her. It wasn't sexual. It was an appraisal. He took in the dress, the rigid posture, the way she was holding her breath. His eyes flicked to her jaw, lingering for a fraction of a second on the spot where the concealer hid the bruise. He saw right through the paint. "Gabriel." Arthur choked out. The name sounded like a death rattle. Gabriel Rossi finally shifted his gaze to the groom. A slow, chilling smile spread across his face, not quite reaching his eyes. "Hello, Colin," Gabriel said. His voice was low, gravelly, and entirely calm. "Nice wedding. Too bad it's cancelled." The cathedral erupted into frantic, hushed whispers. Colin's father, Richard, stood up from the front pew, his face flushed with indignation. "Listen here, Rossi." Richard snapped, pointing a trembling finger. "I don't know what kind of stunt you're trying to pull, but you have no jurisdiction here. We have security outside." Gabriel didn't even turn his head to acknowledge the older man. He just kept his dark eyes locked on Colin. "Your security is currently taking a nap by the dumpsters in the alley." Gabriel said mildly. They were underpaid. It showed in their work ethic. Colin's face went white, then mottled red. You have no business here, Gabriel. This has nothing to do with you. Everything in this city has something to do with me, Gabriel replied, pulling a folded piece of heavy stock paper from the inside pocket of his jacket. He flicked it open. Arthur's debt. $12 million. You bought it from the Leone family 3 weeks ago. It was a legitimate transfer. Colin said, his chest puffing out, trying to reclaim space he was rapidly losing. No, it wasn't, Gabriel corrected him. Because the Leone family owed me $15 million. They didn't have the cash. So they gave me their paper. All of it. Which means Arthur doesn't owe you a dime, Colin. He owes me. And by extension... Gabriel looked at Paige again. Whatever he traded to settle that debt belongs to me. Paige felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. The cold stone in her gut turned into jagged glass. She had been traded. Again. Not to a spoiled, violent rich boy this time, but to a legitimate monster. Gabriel Rossi wasn't a rumor. He was the head of the largest syndicate on the East Coast. He didn't break ribs. He buried bodies in the foundations of the high-rises Colin's family built. That's absurd! Colin spat, though his voice lacked conviction. He stepped toward Gabriel, invading the man's personal space. It was a fatal mistake. She is my fiancée. You can't just walk in here and claim her like a piece of property. You did, Gabriel pointed out calmly. I love her, Colin yelled, playing to the crowd. Gabriel's eyes went completely dead. The shift was so fast, so absolute, it made Paige physically recoil. In a movement almost too fast to track, Gabriel's left hand shot out. He grabbed Colin by the throat, his thumb digging brutally into the carotid artery. With a sharp, violent twist, he slammed Colin down onto the marble steps of the altar. The sickening crack of Colin's skull hitting the stone echoed through the room. Several women screamed. Gabriel didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. He planted one knee onto Colin's chest, pinning him to the floor. His grip on Colin's throat didn't loosen. Colin thrashed his hands, clawing uselessly at Gabriel's arm, his eyes bulging as his airway was completely crushed. Richard lunged forward from the pews. Get off my son! The 4 men at the back of the church moved. One of them casually drew a suppressed pistol and pointed it at the ceiling. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The crowd froze. Richard stopped dead in his tracks, his hands raised. Gabriel leaned down until his face was inches from Colin's. You don't love her, Colin, Gabriel whispered. His voice was soft enough that only Paige, Arthur, and Colin could hear it. You love hitting things that can't hit back. But I hit back, and I hit much, much harder. Gabriel released the pressure on Colin's throat, just enough to let him pull in a ragged, pathetic gasp of air. The debt is mine, Gabriel stated, standing up and brushing a speck of invisible dust from his suit jacket. He looked down at the gasping, crying man on the floor with utter disgust. The girl goes with me. If you or your father try to dispute this in court or in the streets, I will burn your company to the ground, and then I will break every bone in your hands. Do we have an understanding? Colin couldn't speak. He just nodded frantically, coughing up a spatter of blood onto the pristine white steps. Gabriel turned to Paige. She was rigid. Her mind was a frantic loop of panic and calculation. Run. Fight. Scream. None of the options ended with her surviving the night. Gabriel extended a hand toward her. His palm was calloused, the knuckles scarred. Walk with me, Paige, he said. It wasn't a request, but it wasn't a barked order either. It was a statement of fact. Where? She managed to say. Her voice was raspy, barely a whisper. Away from him. Gabriel replied. Paige looked down at Colin. He was pathetic, curled on his side, whining as he held his head. 2 minutes ago, he had been a god in this room. Now he was garbage. She looked at her father. Arthur was weeping silently, staring at the floor, refusing to meet her eyes. He had sold her to Colin to save himself. He wouldn't lift a finger to save her from Gabriel Rossi. She was entirely alone. Paige looked at the bouquet of white roses in her hands. Slowly, deliberately, she opened her fingers. The flowers hit the marble floor, scattering petals over the polished stone. She didn't take Gabriel's hand. She simply bypassed him, lifting the heavy skirts of her dress, and began walking down the aisle. She kept her eyes locked on the heavy oak doors at the back. She didn't look at the guests. She didn't look at Gabriel's men who stepped aside to let her pass. She just walked. Behind her, she heard the steady, calm footsteps of Gabriel Rossi following her out. The air outside the cathedral was thick and humid, a stark contrast to the air-conditioned chill of the sanctuary. The late afternoon sun hit Paige's eyes, blinding her for a second. A black Maybach was idling at the curb, surrounded by 3 heavily tinted SUVs. One of Gabriel's men opened the rear door of the Maybach. Paige didn't hesitate. She climbed in the massive skirt of the wedding dress, swallowing the back seat. She shoved the tulle and silk aside, pressing herself against the far door, making herself as small as possible. The door on the opposite side opened, and Gabriel slid in. The interior of the car suddenly felt suffocatingly small. He smelled of rain leather and something metallic. Gun oil, she realized, with a cold jolt. The doors slammed shut, sealing them in an airtight, soundproof bubble. The driver put the car in gear, and the motorcade pulled away from the curb, leaving the cathedral and the wreckage of her wedding behind. Silence stretched between them. It was a heavy, physical thing. Paige kept her eyes on the window, watching the city blur past. Her heart was beating so fast it physically hurt. The adrenaline that had carried her down the aisle was crashing, leaving a cold, trembling exhaustion in its wake. She had just been kidnapped, or rescued, or both. She dared to glance at him. Gabriel had poured himself a glass of amber liquid from the crystal decanter in the center console. He held it loosely, watching her. He didn't look triumphant or predatory. He just looked observant. Drink. He offered his voice a low rumble over the hum of the tires. No, Paige said. Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. No, thank you. Gabriel took a slow sip, his eyes never leaving her face. You're shaking. I'm in a car with a Mafia boss in a stolen wedding dress. Paige snapped, the fear suddenly twisting into defensive anger. Forgive me if I'm not entirely zen. A tiny, almost imperceptible smirk touched the corner of his mouth. You didn't steal the dress. Colin paid for it. Consider it a parting gift. Where are we going? She demanded. She needed logistics. She needed to know what kind of cage she was being moved to. My estate, up in the hills. Gabriel set the glass down. It's secure. Secure from what? The police. Colin is a coward. He won't do anything. Gabriel said dismissively. The police don't concern me. It's secure from anyone who might think you're leverage. Paige let out a bitter, exhausted laugh. Leverage, I'm not leverage. I'm a commodity. My father made that very clear. She turned to face him, fully ignoring the way her corset dug into her ribs. Let's skip the mysterious benefactor act, Mr. Rossi. You didn't crash a high society wedding and assault a billionaire out of the goodness of your heart. You said it yourself. You own my father's debt, which means you own me. Gabriel's expression didn't change. He simply watched her, letting her burn off the panic. So what is this? Paige continued, her voice rising. Are you going to marry me instead? Sell me to someone else? Put me to work to pay off the 12 million, 15 million? Gabriel corrected, quietly. Whatever, Paige shouted, slamming her hand against the leather seat. Just tell me what you want from me. Gabriel leaned forward slightly. The casual detachment vanished, replaced by an intense, heavy focus that pinned Paige to the seat. I want exactly what you want, Paige, Gabriel said softly. She blinked, thrown off by the answer. What I want, you want out, Gabriel stated. It wasn't a guess. You wanted out of that wedding. You wanted out of Colin's grip. You wanted out of your father's messes. I watched you walk down that aisle. You looked like you were walking to a firing squad. And you're the rescue chopper, she asked mockingly. I'm the guy who burned the firing squad to the ground, Gabriel replied, without missing a beat. He reached over. Paige flinched, pressing herself harder against the door, expecting a blow. But he didn't touch her. He reached past her and pulled a small lever on the door. The child lock disengaged with a click. At the next red light you can open that door and walk away, Gabriel said, leaning back into his seat. I won't stop you. The debt is Colin's problem now, not yours. Your father is clear. You are clear. You can step out of this car and go back to whatever life you had before Colin found you. Paige stared at the door handle. Then she stared at him. Why? She whispered. Because a caged animal is useless to me, Gabriel said plainly. I don't deal in forced labor, and I certainly don't force women to marry me. Colin is an aberration. I despise him. Taking you from him in front of his father, his friends, and his God was a tactical move. It broke his reputation in this city permanently. You were the weapon I used to do it. It was a cold, brutal admission. Oddly, it was the most comforting thing anyone had said to her in weeks. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about obsession. It was business. It was math. She understood math. The Maybach began to slow down. Through the tinted glass, Paige saw a traffic light turn red. The car rolled to a smooth stop. The silence returned. It was deafening. Paige looked at the door handle. All she had to do was pull it. She could run into the crowded streets. She could disappear, but disappear to where she had $5 in her shoe. No phone, no ID. A 20-pound dress that made her a walking beacon. And Colin was a coward, yes, but he was a vindictive coward with unlimited resources. Gabriel might have humiliated him, but Colin would take that rage out on her the second she stepped out from under Gabriel's umbrella of protection. Gabriel didn't look at her. He looked straight ahead, waiting. The light turned green. Paige didn't move her hand. The driver didn't accelerate immediately. He glanced in the rearview mirror, waiting for an order. Gabriel finally turned his head, locking eyes with Paige. He saw the cold, calculated resignation in her posture. He saw the survival instinct kicking in, overriding the fear. Drive, Gabriel said. The Maybach surged forward. Paige let out a long, shaky breath, sinking back into the plush leather. She hadn't run. She had stayed. She had chosen the devil she didn't know, because the devil she knew would kill her. So, Paige said, her voice dropping to a quiet, flat monotone. If I'm not a hostage, and I'm not a bride, what exactly am I doing at your estate? Gabriel poured himself another drink. He didn't offer her one this time. You're going to help me destroy the rest of his family, Gabriel said, taking a sip. Colin broke your ribs 2 years ago. My people found the hospital records. When I'm done with him, he won't have ribs left to break. You're going to tell me everything you know about his father's offshore accounts, and in exchange, I'm going to make sure Colin never breathes the same air as you again. Paige stared at the side of his face. For the first time in 2 years, the cold knot of terror in her stomach was replaced by something else. It felt dangerously like hope. The estate didn't look like a mob boss's compound. There were no gargoyles, no ostentatious gold gates. It was a brutalist masterpiece of poured concrete steel and floor-to-ceiling ballistic glass anchored into the side of a densely forested cliff. It looked like a high-tech bunker that had been featured in Architectural Digest. The Maybach glided through 2 separate security checkpoints. The guards didn't wear uniforms, just tactical vests over dark clothing. They carried rifles with a bored, practiced ease. When the car finally stopped in the subterranean garage, the silence was absolute. Gabriel stepped out first. He didn't open Paige's door. A man in a tailored suit waiting by the elevator did that. "Take her to the East Wing." Gabriel instructed the man, not looking back at Paige. "Tell Helen to find her some clothes, real ones, and bring her something to eat." "Yes, Mr. Rossi." The man looked at Paige with polite, blank professionalism. "Ma'am, if you'll follow me." Paige gathered the massive skirts of the Vera Wang gown and hauled herself out of the car. Her legs felt like lead. She watched Gabriel walk away, his footsteps echoing sharply against the concrete, before he disappeared through a heavy steel door. The East Wing was a sprawling guest suite overlooking the valley. It was minimalist expensive and entirely devoid of personal touches. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, the adrenaline completely evaporated. Purge stood in the center of the room. The silence was suffocating. She caught her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror of the dressing area. She looked deranged. Her perfectly pinned updo was unraveling. The thick concealer on her jaw was cracking. And the dress, God, the dress. It was a suffocating heavy cage of silk and boning. She reached behind her, trying to find the invisible zipper hidden beneath a row of 90 tiny pearl buttons. Her fingers fumbled. The corset dug sharply into her ribs. She twisted her breath, hitching as the dull, familiar ache flared up her side. Panic, sudden and blind, clawed up her throat. She couldn't breathe. The dress was too tight. Colin had chosen it. He had ordered it 2 sizes too small, so she would have to fast for 3 weeks just to zip it up. His hands had touched this fabric. "Get it off!" she whispered frantically. She yanked at the fabric at her shoulder. It didn't tear. It was reinforced silk. She stumbled into the adjacent bathroom, throwing open the vanity drawers. Soaps, lotions, a hairdryer, no scissors. She ran back into the bedroom, her chest heaving, scanning the sleek furniture. There was a heavy brass letter opener sitting perfectly parallel to a notepad on the desk. Paige grabbed it. She shoved the blunt point under the seam of the bodice right below her collarbone and ripped downward. The fabric tore with a loud, satisfying shriek. She hacked at it again. And again. She didn't care that it was a $50,000 gown. She didn't care that she was destroying a piece of art. She just needed it off her skin. She sawed through the corset, boning her knuckles white, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Finally, the tension snapped. The dress fell away, collapsing in a heavy, ruined puddle around her ankles. She stepped out of it, standing in only a simple cotton slip and her underwear. The air hit her damp skin. She took a deep, shuddering breath. Her ribs throbbed, but her lungs filled completely for the first time in 12 hours. Efficient. Paige whipped around, dropping the brass letter opener. It clattered loudly against the hardwood floor. Gabriel was standing in the doorway. He had shed the suit jacket and tie. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to expose forearms corded with muscle and faded ink. He was holding a glass of water and a small white pill. He didn't look at her body. His eyes stayed locked on her face. Then they shifted down to the shredded pile of silk on the floor. "I knocked," he said calmly. "You were busy." Paige crossed her arms over her chest instinctively. "I couldn't get the buttons." "I can see that." Gabriel walked forward and set the glass and the pill on the nightstand. "Ibuprofen, for the ribs. You're favoring your left side." She stared at the pill. "How do you know about that?" "I told you in the car. I read your hospital records," Gabriel said, leaning against the doorframe. He crossed his arms, mirroring her defensive posture, though on him it just looked relaxed. "Fractured 7th and 8th ribs, a ruptured tympanic membrane, 3 bruised vertebrae." You told the ER doctor you fell down a flight of stairs. The doctor noted that the bruising pattern was entirely inconsistent with a fall, but Arthur's lawyers threatened the hospital with a defamation suit if they pushed it. Paige looked away. Hearing the clinical rundown of the worst night of her life, spoken out loud in a flat, businesslike tone, made her stomach turn. "He was drunk," she said. The old excuse slipped out on autopilot. "Men don't beat women because they're drunk, Paige." Gabriel corrected, his voice hardening slightly. "They beat women because they want to. The alcohol just removes the polite filter." He stepped away from the doorframe. "Helen is outside. She has clothes for you. Get dressed. Eat. Try to sleep. Tomorrow we go to work." "Wait." Gabriel stopped his hand on the doorknob. "Why do you need me?" Paige asked, her voice steadying. "You have an army. You have politicians in your pocket. You clearly have hackers who can pull sealed medical files. What could I possibly tell you about Colin's family that you don't already know?" Gabriel looked back at her. The cold, empty look from the cathedral was gone. In its place was a sharp, calculating intelligence. "Because my people look from the outside in," Gabriel said. "You lived on the inside. You know the things they don't put in files. You know who Colin actually trusts. You know what makes his father sweat. I don't want to just kill them, Paige. If I kill them, they become martyrs in the boardroom. I want to dismantle them. I want to take their money, their reputation, and their freedom. And then when they have absolutely nothing left, I'll let the wolves in." He opened the door. "Get some sleep. We have a lot of ruin to orchestrate." The clothes Helen provided were simple. Black leggings, a soft grey cashmere sweater, and thick socks. They felt like armor. Paige didn't sleep. She sat in the leather chair by the window and watched the sun come up over the tree line. As the first rays of light hit the concrete walls of the estate, the reality of her situation settled into her bones. She was living with a cartel boss, but for the first time in 2 years she didn't feel hunted. At 7 in the morning there was a soft knock. Helen, a stern-faced woman in her 50s, who spoke very little. English gestured for Paige to follow her. They walked through a maze of wide, sunlit corridors, eventually arriving at the West Wing. Helen opened a heavy oak door and nodded for Paige to enter. It wasn't an office. It was a nerve center. The room was massive. One entire wall was made of glass, overlooking the drop off the cliff. The opposite wall was lined with massive digital monitors displaying real-time stock tickers, property blueprints, and security feeds. Gabriel was sitting at a sleek, black conference table. Beside him stood the man from the elevator yesterday, and another older, scarred man who looked like he had been built out of scrap iron. They were poring over a series of printed ledgers. Gabriel looked up as Paige walked in. He gestured to an empty chair across from him. There was a steaming mug of black coffee waiting on the table. "Paige, this is Leo," Gabriel said, nodding to the man from the elevator, who offered a brief nod. "And this is Dominic. He runs my procurement." "Procurement of what?" Paige asked, wrapping her hands around the warm coffee mug. "Problems?" Dominic grunted. His voice sounded like a cement mixer. "Sit down," Gabriel said. He slid a thick blue folder across the table toward her. "This is Richard's corporate structure. 3 shell companies in the Caymans, 2 in Panama. They funnel clean money back into his commercial real estate firm to cover the bribes he pays to the zoning board. We know how the money moves. What we don't know is where the physical ledger is." Paige frowned, opening the folder. It was filled with tax documents and wire transfer receipts. "If you know how it moves, why do you need the physical book?" "Because digital trails can be denied. Claimed as a hack. Blamed on a rogue accountant." Leo spoke up, his tone analytical. "Richard is old school. He doesn't trust the cloud. He keeps a hard copy backup of every dirty transaction. The master key. If we find that book and hand it to the feds, the entire family goes to federal prison for RICO violations. My guys have tossed his main office, his penthouse, his yacht, Dominic crossed his massive arms. Nothing. He's got it buried. Paige stared at the documents. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to go back to the 2 years she spent trapped in Colin's orbit. The dinners she sat through staring at her plate while Richard and Colin drank scotch and talked business as if she were a piece of furniture. She remembered a night in late November. Colin had been furious. He had thrown a crystal decanter at the wall, missing her head by inches, screaming about his father's paranoia. Paige opened her eyes. She looked at Gabriel. He doesn't keep it at a property he owns, she said quietly. Gabriel held her gaze, waiting. Richard has a mistress, Paige said. Her name is Evelyn Vance. She's technically a consultant for his firm, but she doesn't actually work there. She lives in a brownstone in Beacon Hill. It's in her name, paid for in cash. Leo rapidly typed something into a tablet. Evelyn Vance, 34. No criminal record. Clean credit. Colin hated her. Paige continued, the memories flowing faster, now cold and sharp. He got drunk one night and complained that his father trusted his whore more than his own son. He said Richard kept the family Bible at her place. I thought he meant a literal Bible. I didn't realize he meant a ledger. Dominic let out a low whistle. A brownstone in Beacon Hill. Quiet. 0 security presence. We can have a team in and out in under 4 minutes. Gabriel didn't look at Dominic. He kept his eyes on Paige. Are you sure? Gabriel asked softly. I'm sure, she said. Gabriel leaned back in his chair. Leo, get a team to Beacon Hill. Do not touch the woman. Just get the safe cracket, take the book, and leave no trace. On it, Leo said, already walking towards the door with his phone pressed to his ear. Suddenly, Gabriel's cell phone sitting flat on the table vibrated loudly. The caller ID flashed across the screen. Arthur. Paige felt her stomach drop. Her father. Gabriel looked at the phone, then at Paige. He reached out and tapped the speaker button. Arthur. Gabriel answered, his voice perfectly smooth. Gabriel, please. Arthur's voice was frantic, breathless, echoing slightly, as if he was in a large, empty room. You have to call Colin off, please. Paige's grip on the coffee mug tightened until her knuckles went white. I don't control Colin, Gabriel said mildly. What seems to be the problem, Arthur? He's here, Arthur sobbed. He brought men to my house. They're breaking things. He says if I don't tell him where you took Paige, he's going to burn the house down with me inside it. In the background of the call, Paige heard the distinct, heavy sound of glass shattering, followed by a cruel, familiar laugh. Colin. Paigey, Colin's voice shouted from a distance over the phone. I know he's listening. You think you can embarrass me. You think you can walk out on me. Paige stopped breathing. The walls of the war room felt like they were shrinking. Gabriel didn't react. He casually picked up a pen and twirled it between his fingers. Put Colin on, Gabriel told Arthur. A moment of scuffling, and then Colin's voice, breathless and vibrating with manic rage, came through the speaker. You're a dead man, Rossi. Colin spat. I have the mayor on speed dial. I have half the precinct captains on my payroll. You give her back right now, or I swear to God I will bury you. Gabriel stopped twirling the pen. He leaned closer to the phone. Colin, Gabriel said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Look out the window of Arthur's living room. A pause on the line. What? Colin snapped. The front window, the big bay one. Look out of it. Total silence on the other end for 5 seconds. Then a trembling, panicked breath from Colin. You see the black SUV parked across the street? Gabriel asked quietly. The one with the tinted windows. How did you... The man in the driver's seat is holding a detonator. Gabriel lied seamlessly, his voice completely devoid of emotion. It's connected to 4 pounds of C4 currently packed tightly against the fuel line of your father's Mercedes, which you drove there tonight. If you don't take your men and walk out of that house in the next 10 seconds, Colin, they're going to scrape you off Arthur's driveway with a spatula." Paige stared at Gabriel, horrified and entirely captivated. "You're bluffing," Colin said, but his voice cracked. 9. Gabriel said, "You wouldn't blow up a car in a residential neighborhood." 8. 7. Wait. Colin panicked. Footsteps thundered over the line. We're leaving, you psycho!" A door slammed over the phone line. A moment later, Arthur's weeping voice returned. "They're gone. Gabriel, they're gone. Leave the house, Arthur. Go to a hotel. Do not call this number again." Gabriel said and hung up. The war room was silent. Paige looked at Gabriel. Her chest was heaving. "Was there an SUV?" "No," Gabriel said, taking a sip of his coffee. "Colin is a bully. Bullies have no spine when you show them a bigger gun." He looked at her, his dark eyes intense. "He knows I have you. He's going to make mistakes now. He's going to act on emotion, and when he does, we will crush him." Paige realized her hands had stopped shaking. For the first time in her life, she wasn't hiding from the storm. She was sitting in the eye of it, and the man beside her was controlling the lightning. The master ledger didn't look like a piece of evidence that could dismantle a billion-dollar empire. It arrived at 2 a.m. in a sterile plastic evidence bag carried by Leo. He dropped it onto the glass conference table. It hit with a dull thud. It was a faded burgundy leather-bound book, the kind you could buy at any office supply store. Evelyn Hayes was asleep. Leo reported his face impassive. He wiped a smudge of dirt off his knuckles. The safe was hidden behind a false panel in the primary closet. Took me 3 minutes to crack the biometric lock. We were in and out before her dog even barked. Gabriel didn't touch the book immediately. He just stared at it. Then he pulled a pair of latex gloves from a drawer, snapped them on, and carefully opened the cover. Paige stood up and leaned over the table. The pages were dense with handwritten text. But it wasn't English. It wasn't even standard accounting shorthand. It was a frantic, chaotic grid of alphanumeric strings, random dates and symbols. Dominic groaned from the corner of the room. "It's encrypted. The old bastard wrote it in code. It'll take the tech guys weeks to run a brute-force decryption on manual handwriting." Gabriel frowned, turning a page. The grid continued. Row after row of nonsense. Paige leaned closer. Her eyes scanned the first column. 42-B-99, 18-A-04, 77-C-12. Her breath hitched. A cold, sharp memory surfaced. It was a Tuesday night. A year and a half ago. Colin had dragged her to his father's study after a charity gala. He was drunk, searching for a specific scotch, tearing through Richard's desk drawers. He had knocked over a stack of zoning permits. Paige had knelt on the floor in her evening gown, quietly picking them up, terrified of making a sound. She remembered the lot numbers stamped in red ink on the top right corners of the permits. "It's not a code," Paige said. The room went dead silent. Gabriel looked up at her, his hands pausing on the ledger. "Explain." "It's not a cipher. It's an index," she said, tracing a finger in the air just above the page. "Look at the formatting. Number, letter, number. Those are municipal zoning lot coordinates. The first number is the district. The letter is the zoning type commercial, residential, industrial. The last number is the block." She looked at Gabriel. His dark eyes were intensely focused on her. "Richard doesn't record the bribes by the name of the politician." Paige continued, her voice gaining strength, the hesitation bleeding out of it. "He records them by the piece of land the politician helped him acquire or rezone. If you cross-reference these lot numbers with the city's public property registry, you'll find out exactly which shell company bought the land and on what date. The date's next to the lot numbers in this book." She tapped the page. Those are the dates the offshore wires were sent to the board members. Leo stared at her. He pulled his tablet out and rapidly typed in the first string. 42-B-99. District 42, Commercial Zoning, Block 99. Leo read aloud, his voice dropping an octave. Purchased by Apex Holdings, one of the Cayman shell companies you identified earlier. Date of purchase October 14th. Gabriel looked at the ledger. The date next to the entry is October 12th. The wire went out 2 days before the sale closed. It's a perfect map. Dominic muttered, stepping forward to look at the book with newfound reverence. Gabriel slowly pulled off the latex gloves. He didn't look at his men. He looked at Paige. The appraisal in his eyes was heavy, thorough, and entirely different from the way any man had ever looked at her. Colin had looked at her like a trophy. Her father had looked at her like a life raft. Gabriel Rossi looked at her like she was a weapon. Leo Gabriel said softly, not breaking eye contact with Paige. Wake up the analytics team. I want every single lot number in this book cross-referenced with public records by sunrise. Build the timeline. Find the names of the politicians who took the cash. Yes, boss. Leo grabbed the book and practically ran out of the room. Dominic followed close behind. Suddenly they were alone in the war room. The massive digital screens cast a pale blue glow over the concrete walls. Paige realized she was gripping the edge of the glass table so hard her fingers ached. She let go and took a step back. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a strange, hollow exhaustion. Gabriel walked around the table. He stopped a few feet away from her, respecting the physical boundary she instinctively set. You have a photographic memory, he observed. I have a survival instinct, Paige corrected quietly. When you live with someone volatile, you learn to memorize their environment. You notice when a key is moved. You notice when a drawer is left open. You memorize the numbers on pieces of paper so you know exactly how to put them back before they get angry. Gabriel's jaw tightened. It was a microscopic shift, a fleeting flash of violent anger that wasn't directed at her but for her. Colin made a catastrophic mistake. Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. He thought he bought a victim. He didn't realize he brought the architect of his own ruin into his house. He reached out and picked up her empty coffee mug. Go to sleep, Paige, he said gently. When you wake up, the world is going to look very different for them. By noon the next day, Richard's empire was bleeding out. Gabriel didn't use guns. He used gravity. He leaked the decrypted ledger data to 3 separate federal prosecutors, simultaneously, completely anonymously. Then he had his brokers trigger margin calls on every leveraged debt Richard's company held. Paige sat in the war room, watching the bloodbath unfold on the digital monitors. The news channels were running breaking graphics. Federal agents in windbreakers were carrying cardboard boxes out of Richard's corporate headquarters downtown. The company's stock price was plummeting, dropping 20% in 3 hours. The feds froze their domestic accounts at 11 a.m. Leo reported, clicking through a series of screens. Richard is currently detained for questioning. They haven't officially charged him yet, but with the data we fed them, they have enough to hold him for 48 hours. What about Colin? Paige asked. The name tasted like ash in her mouth. Gabriel stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the valley. He was dressed in a black tailored suit, looking every bit the corporate executioner. Colin is panicking, Gabriel said without turning around. His father is unreachable. Their accounts are frozen. The politicians they bought are scrambling to distance themselves, burning their own files. Colin is a man who relies on money to fix his problems. Without it, he's just a thug in an expensive suit. He'll do something stupid. Paige warned, feeling the familiar, icy dread creeping back up her spine. When he gets backed into a corner, he strikes out blindly. As if on cue, the heavy oak door swung open. Dominic stepped in. The scarred man looked irritated rather than alarmed. "Boss!" Dominic grunted. "We just got hit. Southside warehouse. 4 guys rolled up in a van, shot out the security cameras, and threw 2 Molotovs through the loading dock windows. The sprinkler systems caught it, but we lost a pallet of electronics." Gabriel turned around slowly. His expression was utterly blank. "Casualties?" "None. Night watchman took cover. The shooters peeled out, but street cameras caught the plates. It's one of Colin's personal security vehicles. He's lashing out." Leo scoffed. "He hit a front company. That warehouse clears legitimate televisions. He didn't even aim for a nerve center. He's just breaking glass to make noise." "He's trying to draw me out," Gabriel said calmly. He walked over to the table and picked up his watch, a heavy brushed steel piece, and strapped it to his wrist. "He wants a street war. He thinks if he makes enough noise, the commission will step in and force a sit-down." "Will they?" Page asked. "The commission only steps in when profits are threatened." Gabriel replied, his eyes cold and dark. "Right now, the only thing threatening their profits is a federal investigation that Colin's father caused. I'm doing them a favor by cleaning house." He looked at Dominic. "Send a crew to the south side. Clean up the glass. Do not retaliate. Do not touch Colin." Dominic frowned, clearly hating the order. "We just let him throw fire at us?" "For now," Gabriel said. He turned to Page. "Get your coat." Page blinked. "Where are we going?" "You've been trapped in a concrete box for 2 days, and before that you were trapped in a much smaller one for 2 years," Gabriel said, walking toward the door. "It's time you remembered what the city looks like when you aren't hiding from it." 40 minutes later, they were sitting in the private dining room of a high-end Italian restaurant in the heart of the financial district. Gabriel owned the building, the restaurant, and likely the judge eating pasta 2 tables over in the main dining room. The private room was entirely soundproof, enclosed in frosted glass. The table was set with heavy silver and crystal. Page looked out the clear pane of glass that overlooked the street below. 3 blocks away, the glowing logo of Richard's corporate headquarters sat atop a skyscraper. "They're going to lose the building," Gabriel said, taking a sip of Barolo. He was watching her, not the view. "I know," Page said quietly. "Richard leveraged it to buy a port in Miami. If the feds freeze his assets, he defaults on the loan by Friday." Gabriel nodded slowly. "You understand how power works. You always did. That's why Colin hated you. He wanted a pet. You were a mirror reflecting how hollow he actually was." Page looked away from the window, meeting Gabriel's gaze. The candlelight caught the sharp angles of his face. There was a dangerous magnetic pull to him. He was a violent man, a criminal by every legal definition. Yet sitting across from him, Page felt safer than she had in a cathedral surrounded by 300 upstanding citizens. "Why are we really here, Gabriel?" she asked. "Because Colin is tracking my movements," Gabriel said simply. "He knows I left the estate. He knows I'm here. He's going to come." Page froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs, the familiar terror spiking instantly. "You used me as bait." "No," Gabriel said, his voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. "I used myself as bait. You are here because I want you to see him." "See him do what? Shoot you?" Gabriel leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. The dark intensity in his eyes anchored her, keeping the panic from spiraling. "See him break," Gabriel corrected softly. "You need to see him powerless, Page. You need to see the monster reduced to nothing. Until you see it with your own eyes, he's always going to be a ghost haunting you in the dark. I brought you here to watch the exorcism." The frosted glass door to the private dining room shattered inward. It didn't break with a cinematic explosion, just a brutal, ugly crash of splintering safety glass. A waiter shouted in the main room. Heavy footsteps pounded against the hardwood floor. Gabriel didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't even put down his fork. He simply chewed, swallowed, and dabbed his mouth with a linen napkin. Colin burst through the empty doorframe. He looked nothing like the untouchable heir who had stood at the altar 3 days ago. His Tom Ford suit was severely wrinkled, stained with sweat, and something dark near the lapel. His golden hair was matted flat against his forehead. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and frantic with the panicked energy of an animal trapped in a burning barn. 2 of Gabriel's men materialized from the hallway, their hands resting casually on the grips of concealed firearms beneath their jackets. Gabriel raised a single finger. The men stopped, falling back a half step, giving Colin the floor. "You think you're smart, Rossi?" Colin sneered, though the words lacked their usual venom. His chest heaved violently. "You think you can just hand a ledger to the feds and take my family down? We own the judges. We'll be out on bail by midnight. Federal judges don't take your father's phone calls anymore." "Colin," Gabriel said mildly. He poured a few more drops of Barolo into his glass. "The DOJ froze your accounts. You can't make bail. Your father is currently sitting in a holding cell trading everything he knows for a plea deal that doesn't involve him dying in a Supermax facility. He's throwing you under the bus as we speak." "You're lying." Colin spat, but his voice trembled. He took a step forward, his hands balling into fists. "I'll kill you. Right here." Gabriel finally looked up. "With what, the gun trembling in your right pocket? It's a subcompact Glock. The safety is still engaged. You're shaking so badly you'd hit the ceiling before you hit me. And if you even twitch toward it, Leo will put a hollow point through your brain stem." Colin froze. His eyes darted to the shadows of the hallway. The illusion of his power shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. He looked at Gabriel, realizing the absolute terrifying disparity between them. Colin played at violence. Gabriel authored it. Desperate, Colin's gaze snapped to Paige. Instinctively, her muscles tightened. The old programming flared. "Don't look at him, don't speak, make yourself small." But she was sitting across from a man who had built an empire by refusing to kneel, and his gravity held her in the chair. She didn't shrink. She looked back. "Paige," Colin pleaded. The sudden shift from rage to pathetic begging was whiplash. He took a stumbling step towards the table. Tell him to call the feds off. We can fix this. I love you. You know I love you. I get so angry because I care." Paige stared at him. She looked at his bloodshot eyes. She looked at the sweat dripping down his neck. For 2 years, this man had been the monster under her bed. He had broken her ribs. He had bought her life for $12 million. She had spent every waking moment terrified of the shadow he cast. But looking at him now in the harsh, unflinching light of reality, the shadow vanished. He wasn't a monster. He was just a pathetic, weak man who needed to break things to feel tall. The realization washed over her like cold water, shocking and incredibly pure. The heavy, suffocating stone of terror that had lived in her chest for 2 years finally cracked open and dissolved. "You don't love anything, Colin," Paige said. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. It carried the absolute weight of the truth. "You're a parasite, and I have nothing left to give you." Colin's face twisted in genuine, ugly fury. The mask of the victim vanished. "You ungrateful bitch! I bought you! You belong to—" He reached into his pocket. The movement was sloppy. Before his hand even cleared the fabric, Gabriel moved. He didn't draw a gun. He stood up, grabbed the heavy crystal Barolo bottle by the neck, and slammed it down across the side of Colin's head. The sound was a wet, heavy thud. The bottle didn't break. Colin did. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed sideways, hitting the hardwood floor like a sack of cement. A small pool of blood began to seep from his scalp into the grain of the wood. Gabriel set the bottle back on the table. He didn't look at the unconscious man at his feet. Down on the street below, the wail of sirens pierced the quiet evening. They were growing rapidly louder, converging on the restaurant. Gabriel picked up a linen napkin and wiped a stray drop of wine from his thumb. I tipped the feds off to his location 20 minutes ago. The arson at the warehouse violated his parole from an old assault charge. He's going away for a very, very long time. Paige looked down at Colin. She felt nothing. No pity, no fear, just a hollow, echoing silence. The exorcism was complete. Gabriel stepped around the table and offered her his hand. "Let's go home," he said. 3 weeks later, the dust finally settled over the city. Richard's commercial real estate empire was carved up and sold off at auction to pay federal fines. Colin was denied bail, sitting in a high-security lockdown facility, awaiting trial for racketeering, arson, and extortion. Arthur had quietly boarded a flight to Geneva. His debts erased his life intact, but his relationship with his daughter severed permanently by his own cowardice. The world moved on. Paige stood on the sweeping concrete balcony of the East Wing, watching the fog roll through the valley below Gabriel's estate. She wore a thick wool sweater, a mug of tea warming her hands against the crisp autumn air. Her ribs didn't ache anymore. She could breathe completely. The heavy sliding glass door opened. Gabriel walked out. He wore a dark Henley shirt and faded jeans, looking stripped down, lacking the tailored armor he wore in the city. He carried a thick manila envelope. He stood next to her at the railing, looking out at the fog. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was no longer heavy with calculation. It was comfortable, familiar. Gabriel set the envelope on the concrete ledge. "Your father's debt is formally dissolved." Gabriel said, his voice a low rumble over the wind. "The accounts are wiped. There is no paper trail connecting you to my organization or to Colin's." Paige looked at the envelope. "What's in it?" "A passport, a new driver's license, a bank account with $2 million in clean, untraceable funds." Gabriel replied. He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the tree line. "There's a black car waiting in the garage. It will take you to the private airstrip. The pilot has instructions to fly you anywhere in the world. You are completely free, Paige." She stared at the thick brown paper. Everything she had wanted for 2 years was sitting on that ledge. Escape, anonymity, safety. "You're letting me go," she said quietly. "I never kept you." Gabriel corrected, turning to face her. The dark intensity in his eyes was stripped of its usual cold control. There was a raw, bruising honesty beneath it. "You were never a prisoner here. You were a guest. The war is over. You survived it. You earned your peace." Paige reached out and touched the edge of the envelope. The paper was rough under her fingertips. "Where would I go?" she asked. "Anywhere." Gabriel said, a muscle feathering in his jaw. "Somewhere bright. Somewhere the shadows don't reach. Somewhere you never have to look over your shoulder again." Paige stepped closer to him. The wind whipped her hair across her face. "I tried living in the light," she said softly. "I poured coffee in a quiet town. I kept my head down. And the monsters found me anyway. They wore expensive suits and smiled at charity galas, and everyone called them good men." Gabriel stared down at her, his breathing perfectly still. "I don't want to run anymore, Gabriel," she said, looking directly into the dark, violent depths of his eyes. "I don't want to be a civilian pretending the world is safe. It's not. But I know exactly who you are. You don't hide your darkness behind white wedding dresses and polite society. You own it." She pushed the manila envelope back across the concrete ledge toward him. "I don't want the plane," she said. Gabriel didn't move. "I am a criminal, Paige. I deal in blood. If you stay, you step into a world you can never wash off. I won't ever be a good man." "I don't need a good man," Paige whispered, closing the distance between them. She reached up, resting her palm flat against his chest, feeling the heavy, steady thud of his heart. I need the man who burns the firing squad to the ground. Gabriel let out a sharp, ragged breath. The iron control he held over himself finally snapped. His hands came up, framing her face. His calloused thumbs brushed against her jawline, directly over the spot where the yellowing bruise used to be. The touch was impossibly gentle for a man who tore empires apart with his bare hands. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a desperate, possessive collision. It was a seal, a vow. It tasted of rain-black coffee and absolute certainty. Paige leaned into him, letting the heat of his body anchor her against the biting wind. She didn't feel small. She didn't feel fragile. She felt like steel pulled fresh from the forge. Gabriel broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers. "If you stay," he murmured, his voice a gravelly promise against her lips. "You stay as my equal. No one will ever look down on you. No one will ever raise a hand to you. And if they try, I will paint the streets with them." Paige smiled, a real sharp smile that reached her eyes for the first time in years. "I know," she said. She turned her head, looking out over the concrete fortress, down into the valley, and toward the city beyond it. Let them have their polite society. Let them have their fragile glass-house empires. She belonged in the fortress, and heaven help anyone who tried to breach the gates. If this story had your heart racing and kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now. Paige's journey from a pawn in a rigged game to a queen ruling an empire of shadows proves that sometimes the only way to beat a monster is to walk in the dark with a bigger one. Drop a comment below. Would you have taken the plane ticket, or would you have stayed with Gabriel? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another dark, deeply human drama.